Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Better Than Rich show. I'm your host, Andrew Biggs, and I'm here with my special guest today, Mike Ambrosino. Mike, so glad you're here, man. How are you today?
Doing great, man. Doing great.
Awesome.
Thanks for asking.
Yeah, very cool. I know you've been traveling around, but you're back in New York right now? Is that right? Back at the old stomping grounds?
Yep, back in New York after a cross-country road trip.
That's cool. Where'd you stop at?
Made my way down from Northern California to LA to San Diego to Arizona to Las Vegas to Utah to Yellowstone to Jackson Hole to Minnesota to Wisconsin to Chicago to Nashville to South Carolina to Raleigh to Philly to New York.
Wow. So you weren't kidding. You weren't kidding. It really was across the nation. How long was that road trip for?
Like 7 weeks.
7 weeks. That's pretty cool.
Horrible route. Just not efficient at all. But
Clearly not efficient, but was it the scenic route at least?
it was more, I asked myself the question, and I saw during the pandemic, I think we've all been limited in the number of people that we've seen. And
Mm-hmm.
I just thought about, man, there's so many people I haven't seen in person for a year and a half, 2 years. People that I've even stood in their weddings and I haven't seen them.
Right.
And I don't know how long this is going to last. So I'll go to them during this time if I can. And so what I decided was, if I ask myself the question, should I see them? I'm just going to see them. I'm not going to jump to where do I draw the line?
That's cool, man. That's really cool. I know we're going to talk a lot more about the journey that you've been on more recently in the past year. I definitely want to dig in on some of the things we were chatting about. But I'm curious, just in that 7-week time span, was there any lessons that were given to you or that you unpacked in taking 7 weeks and driving across the country and having all these experiences? What was that like for you? And were there any lessons that you took away from it?
Gave me a lot of time to be with myself. A lot of time to think. There were a lot of times where I was driving and I didn't have any service, and just had a lot of ideas come to mind, and I'm trying to record them. And I just kept saying to myself, man, I wonder how many things or thoughts that I've had in my life that I've never captured, that I didn't start a log on my phone in my notes, that I didn't write down to further explore later. And I also recognize that when you see people and you spend time with them, there's just no substitute for it. And it can re-spark relationships like that. People you haven't seen in years all of a sudden can be back into your life just by sharing a few laughs, eating a meal together. And I'm so thankful that I did it, because now some of those people who were always, there's love there, now they're just back in my life again in a more communicative way, where we're texting each other more frequently, maybe a call, maybe a FaceTime now, as opposed to before. I think there was a little bit of a barrier because we hadn't seen each other in a while.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Miranda in the chat says proximity is power, right? And it's so true. And I love this idea. I want to circle back on the thoughts idea first, but you also, or in a second, but first I want to actually ask you about connection and relationships, because you are, in my opinion, one of the best at it. In fact, you might be the person in my life who at least that I know personally, who's the best at maintaining relationships over time, at creating memories and strong bonds with people. So what are some of your, I don't know if I want to call it strategies, but ideas? Like, how do you think about this? Is there a philosophy that you have to relationships? And if so, what is it? And if not, at least, like, what are some of the strategies that you use? Because I see you maintain relationships with a lot of people over many, many years. And some people that are really, really impressive. I'll never forget landing in the Spokane airport. We were meeting there, going to a bachelor party. And you're like, yeah, like my friend just walked by. He's the CEO of North Face, and like we just happened to run into each other. I was like, you just happen to know the CEO of North Face. Like who are you, Mike Ambrosino? So talk to me, man. Like, what are your strategies and what's your philosophy on maintaining strong relationships with people?
That is so not the norm. So,
well, you made it seem like it, it'd be pretty cool if it was. So maybe just play it off. I'm just playing with
you. How are you? Like, definitely not a normal occurrence in my life.
Sure.
I think it's something that I'm really focused on is maintaining these relationships. And I don't think most people see it that way. And I don't take things personal when somebody doesn't respond to a text. I often don't believe it's my fault. I often believe there's a million things going on in their world. They could have missed it. I'm okay with following up if I don't get a response. I try not to speculate of what friction there could be between us because usually that's not it. It's just poor communication habits on their end, overload, incapacity, or bad timing. And so I also tried to adopt this philosophy, and it doesn't mean I'm right in this, but I think we often try and believe that relationships and friendships are 50-50, and that I just think that's a bad approach. Like, I'm okay with being what I perceive as the better friend to them than they are to me, and knowing that I'm going to give more than I'm probably going to get. And if we're always expecting like tick for tack reciprocity, it's just unlikely that we're going to, because most people are trying to focus on their own stuff. Me too. And so just recognizing that, I usually reach out to them. They don't reach out to me. Who the heck cares? That might not be how they're wired to just shoot you a message. Like you might not be in their awareness, but if they're in yours and you know that there's something there, why not reach out? A couple of small things I do, like just from something that anybody could do, is anytime I have like a positive memory about someone or something that comes up that makes me think of them, I really try and relay that to them. And like for you, right? Like when I sent you that video of No One Knows Me Like the Piano, the song, like something small like that, like made me think of you. I don't even know if you respond to the text immediately, and it doesn't matter to me because I just like I'm putting that out there. And so whenever I have something that comes up, I'll usually, a call is probably not the route that I take anymore. I'll just try and send them like a quick video or a voice memo and just let them know I'm thinking about them and that I care. And I don't even care if they respond. Like, would it be ideal? Sure. It'd be nice, right? I'd like that connection, but most of the time, if you ever run into that person who didn't respond to the video, they watched it and they run into you. It's like, man, dude, I'm sorry I didn't get back to you. Like, I just had this and this and this going on, and I'm not good at that stuff. And that's okay. There's plenty of things that people are so much better than me at that I am deficient in my life, that I don't go and pin blame on how he's better than me, she's better than me, I'm better than them. It's just we all have our domains that we're pretty good at, and mine just happens to be like effectively communicating in this way.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you bring that up. I think I'll never. I think it was my birthday, and you sent me a voice memo about karaoke night in Lake Tahoe, and you're like, I'll never forget. You getting up to sing "Come Sail Away," and like us like. Bringing the bar down, all those things. It was like when I got that message, it's like something I'll never forget because it's like a shared experience that we had together. And, again, I don't know if I responded or what, because you probably are a better friend. But the whole point is like just the thoughtfulness. I sense this like deep thoughtfulness when it comes to the care that you have for your relationships that I don't think many people have. Now, I also love what you said. I'm okay being, 70-30 rather than 50-50 or 80-20 rather than 50-50. Why do you think most people aren't? Like, what's going on with their belief system or their limiting beliefs that's not allowing them to do that? Are they just taking it personally, or why are they failing and just expecting too much from people.
I think this is the example I often give is I leave you a voice memo, Biggs, right? And you listen to it. You can't respond right now, or
Mm-hmm.
you're choosing not to respond right now. I'll get to it by the end of the week.
Right.
The end of the week comes, you don't do it. 2 weeks pass. You didn't respond to the voice memo. And you're just like, oh, shoot, man. Like, I still haven't responded to that voice mail from Mike. A month passes. It's like, oh, shoot, that's lingering. Like, I don't want to reach out to him now because, like, I still haven't responded to that voice memo. And then a quarter goes by, 6 months, and then a year goes by and you didn't reach out because you felt bad that you didn't respond to the initial message. And that stuff happens all the time.
Sure.
And if you were to call me after a year, you might have on your mind, oh man, I'm so sorry I didn't call you back. Like, I know you left that voicemail. And I might be like, what are you talking about? Like, I'll have no recollection of it. And people just start painting these stories in their head and they get really powerful. And I just recognize that I'm okay with rejection, like if you want to call it that, or the lack of responsiveness. There are some people on my phone. I have an iPhone and it's just like all blue. Like, and that's okay. Like, what is it? If I'm sending a thoughtful, kind message to them and they don't respond, like, I don't care that I keep sending it, because the one time that they do send it, it might come back and be like, hey man, I'm really sorry. I wasn't in a place to respond to this, but each time you sent a text to me, it picked me up. And there's just a lot of things that aren't between us. And I choose to focus on those benefits rather than how it might make me look. Some people might perceive it as really desperate, that I'll like, dude, do you not get the picture? Like, this person clearly doesn't like you because they don't respond to your messages. That's not true. It doesn't have to be true, but we've created that perception. And sometimes people just aren't texters. They're not phone call people. My brother's like that. Like, I have to be in his proximity for us to like build our relationship. And there's no love lost. Literally, I had a conversation with him, and in my mind, I'm going through all this stuff, kind of like you're sharing. I'm having all these questions come up of like, oh man, like, did I do something wrong? Like, why is our relationship more distant? And when I got back here and I had this conversation with him, which felt uncomfortable to have, I'm just like, hey, I don't feel like our relationship was in the same place. And he was like, yeah, well, you weren't close by, so it was harder for us to work on it. And now that you're here, we're going to spend more time together. Like, there was no love lost. In my head, I'm just like, oh my God, well, we're not talking as much. All mine. And we just project that onto other people, and we don't know the real story, and we don't know. We make assumptions.
Right. And I like what you said. Like, some people aren't texters, some people aren't going to respond in certain ways, and it's really just the idea of practicing grace and forgiveness and the benefit of the doubt, right? I mean, this is something that I remember from Tim Ferriss. Like, when you're trying to reach out to people, especially people in positions of power, or you want to like, pick their brain or whatever, you always have to give them the benefit of the doubt. That if you're sending them an email, the reason they're not responding isn't because they don't like you. It isn't because they hate you. It's just literally because, bad timing, or they looked over it, or, there's so many times I'm so mad that Apple doesn't have like a mark as unread text feature, because you check the text, you mean to respond, but you don't, and then it's marked as read and you move on. And it's like, so many things like that happen. And I see so many relationships, especially for younger people, they just get burned because, and they burn bridges with people that they love in their lives simply because they aren't willing to give some grace every once in a while. I think that also goes for our employees and the people we work with. Sometimes, that old quote of everyone you meet is facing a battle that you know nothing about is so true. And we know that we're going through things as individuals, but why wouldn't we expect that everyone else on the planet is also doing that, going through their own version of that? And so I love this idea of giving people the benefit of the doubt and just practicing this like magnanimous attitude. And I think you embody it almost better than anyone else I know. So that's pretty awesome, man. Thanks for sharing that. talk to me about deep thinking, because you mentioned on the drive you were thinking deeply about things, and you've been doing an exercise now for about a year. I'll let you kind of share what you've been up to. But I just heard about this today as we were kind of doing a pre-interview, and I was amazed by some of the things you were sharing with me. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on thought, on deep thinking, and kind of tell people what you've been up to for the last year.
Yeah. I want to put one more, if you want to call it strategy, when it
Yeah,
comes to networking. There's a couple of things that I
sure.
think everybody can do that just don't come to mind for people that I've just discovered because I've made mistakes and I've figured things out. Um,
Hmm.
I think one thing I always try and do is have something that I can invite people to. And in that, I try and host, not now, but I try and host 4 events a year where I can invite people individually to these 4 events. And that gives me 4 touch points with someone a year. Once a quarter makes it feel like people always talk to me. And so when you're
Hmm.
talking to people 4 times a year, that's much more frequently than they're having communication with most people in their lives. And so I'm in their awareness because I'm sending out these invitations, and it's a positive net gain for them because I'm inviting them to something in which they can hopefully have fun.
Hmm.
And so they see me in a positive light, and it's like, man, that Michael, he's always thinking about me. That he's always reaching out. And it's 4 times a year that I literally have, if I'm in San Francisco, I have an invitee list. Like if I'm in New York, I have an and it feels like I'm always reaching out to them, but it's 4 times a year. And then I can just say, hey, like most of the time they won't be able to come. And they'll think, oh, that means that Michael will never
Hmm.
invite me again. Not true. I don't take it personal at all. It's like, cool, you have something that day. What am I supposed to do? You already have prior engagements. I don't take it personal that you can't make it, like that. I think that's really powerful. And then if you can have access to something that other people don't have, it's a great tool for networking. Like when we were in San Francisco, we had access to Factory. That place is
Right.
incredible. And so other people, when you invite them there, they're like, what is this?
Mm.
And so it creates some sort of mystique because they can't get that anywhere else. And you have
Hmm.
access to it. So those two things are really like part of things I'm going to do for the rest of my life.
Yeah, dude. I remember that Friendsgiving you threw there. That was pretty incredible. I mean, I don't even know how many people showed up, and they were from all over different, communities. Right? It was like the business tech community, but then there was like Burning Man community, and then there was like startup community. It was just like really really cool to watch these people kind of mix and mingle, and you're kind of a master at that. So if anyone wants to get on Michael's good side here and be invited to some pretty cool parties, reach out to him and and build a connection, because he's always somebody who's doing that. I also just admire, and you can talk about this too, and then we can move to the thought question. But just your capacity to make introductions is really interesting. How do you go about thinking about making introductions? And because I've seen you just be super generous in terms of how you make introductions, and it's almost like this trust economy where you have a lot of trust inside your network, you have a lot of network equity, so that when you make an introduction, I'm literally having a phone call with someone that you introduced me to on Friday. We're gonna have an hour chat and catch up and get to know each other a little bit and see how we might be able to add value to each other. And so it's just like this super generosity around it. And I don't know, it seems like there's some sort of belief system that kind of what goes around comes around. I don't know if you want to talk about that, but how do you feel about introductions? What's your strategy there, and how do you think about it?
It's great to hear you say that now because I used to be
Mm.
really bad at it.
Really?
Well, if you remember Biggs at Epic Fest, this is years ago, John Israel was writing 5 thank you cards a day. I
Hmm.
felt so called to take on a daily challenge. I was like, well, I'm going to make 5 introductions a day. And I was totally in over my head.
Mm.
And I made tons of mistakes trying averaging 5 introductions a day for 365 days straight. There was a lot of things I messed up and I burned a lot of network equity. I'll tell you that much. But it wasn't
Got it.
out of a bad intention. It was just out of not really quite understanding how to make powerful introductions, not knowing that there is a fashion in which is most effective. And so what I did was make 5 introductions a day, and I learned a lot of lessons during that year. And one of them, it's simple, is the double opt-in, which is just making like clearly sharing the value of why you would hop on the phone or interact with this person and why it would be valuable to them, why it would be valuable to you, and ask for permission from both sides, which is so simple, but I
Mm,
was not doing that. And once I started doing that, everybody got on the call and they had an understanding of why we're getting on the call. Prior to that, at times it'd be like, hey,
mm,
like I like Mike, you like Mike. I'm not really sure why we're on the phone. And sometimes it'd work because they'd be able to like see what I saw and just gel on the call.
mm,
But you shouldn't expect that. You shouldn't expect that two people can get on a call from two different worlds and just instantly have chemistry. Does that happen? Sure. But if you don't give them clear guidelines of what they have in common, what's the point of interest, what mutual understanding that they should be communicating with each other, just very unlikely that it's going to work out. And so now I don't really like making introductions unless I know it's a win-win for both parties and both people are in.
mm.
And I just try and I try and find the time. You know, the person that I introduced you to, I mean, we were talking about that like in August. And I reached out to him and he's very good at responding to me. And he didn't respond to me. And it was because he was away with his family.
Mhm.
And then I saw him in person and we talked. I've mentioned it again. And then he was like, yes, I want to. Sorry, I didn't respond to your text. Not I didn't respond to my text. And then I sent an introduction, hopefully that both of you are clear on why you would get on the phone and what common points you already share. And I try and make a little fun, as you both saw, that
Mm.
creates a little intrigue because I want both people to be excited about who they're speaking to.
Totally, totally. So, guys, if you're listening at home and taking notes, the double opt-in strategy, right? Making sure you have permission from both parties before you make the introduction, uh, because especially if you're kind of the person who's a little busier, a little further along, and you value your time a lot, the last thing you want is a bunch of introductions that are going to waste your time. And so, you can burn network equity by just, making introductions that aren't aligned. So only by making aligned introductions has Mike really built that network equity up. So that's super cool. Do you want to transition, or is there any other strategies on this that you want to talk through?
Yeah, I think that's good. It's
Okay.
it's often hard for me to say this stuff because sometimes you've just been doing it so long that you're unconsciously competent and you don't even recognize that you do it, but
Of course.
other people see it and they're like, "Oh, that's a cool thing." You don't even recognize it's a thing.
Right. Right. Cool, man. So then tell me about this project that you've been working on for the last year, and fill people in, and because I'm really excited to learn more about this.
So I mentioned I did the 5 introductions a day for a year. Got a lot out of that. It was really hard. I don't necessarily recommend doing it. I don't recommend trying to make 5 introductions a day for everybody. And I also probably wouldn't recommend you taking on a daily challenge that has to involve other people. And that was something I did and involve other people's involvement, if that makes sense. Where introductions,
Hmm.
that's not all on me. But I decided because I heard John Israel, he said the one thing he wanted to work on in his life was gratitude, which seems so big and ambiguous at times to work on as a skill. But he put time and energy towards it and figured out a way, writing 5 thank you cards a day, to improve his skill of gratitude. And I said, for me, what's something that I'm I know would benefit me if I did it every day for at least 30 minutes that I'll look back and I'll also have accumulated something from it. And so I decided to write every day for 365 days straight. And that was really hard because that wasn't a habit of mine. And I hated writing, mostly from a place of hating that I'm not good at it. I
Mm.
didn't mind writing, it just wasn't as clear as I can verbally communicate. And if you and I are speaking, Biggs, if we just had a stenographer typing everything out, sometimes we get to the point by a back and forth. There's no back and forth when you're just writing. So you have to be that much clearer, that much more succinct. And so I decided to write for 365 days straight. And if you and I sat down and I gave you 24 hours to write about all the topics you think are worth talking about in life, I don't know how long that list would be, but I guarantee you, if I gave you 365 days, that list would be a lot longer.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
Mm-hmm.
just what I had, is that every time I had something I wanted to write about come up, I just added it to my list. And sometimes when I'd sit at a computer every day, I would look at the list and some things would be like, I want to talk about this right now. And sometimes it wouldn't, didn't feel right. And sometimes maybe like after this, I'm not writing every single day now. But if I were to write today, I might say, well, this is what I got from Andrew's, show, or something we talked about that sparked having more of a conversation. And when you write, you don't have to edit it in the moment. I probably advise you not to, but I advise you to read it all at the end. And when you read it all at the end, some of it doesn't make sense because you have context. In your head, it makes sense, of course, because you know all the things that are going on in your head, but other people don't. And so when I'm writing, I'm rereading it and I'm just trying to say to myself, how can I say this more clearly? This word is not necessary. This is not necessary. Most of the things are not necessary. And how can I say it so people can really hear my voice? So I did that. And so I wrote 750 words a day, which is about 3 written pages a day. And from that, again, unless you're delivering a speech that you've given a ton of times, you can't just fire off 750 words. You really have to sit there and think. And so for me, I would experience usually like write some and then I have to sit there and think the topic more. And I don't think often in our lives we challenge ourselves to just sit there and thought about any said topic. And so I would think about what I was writing and continue to think and continue to think and continue to think, and usually just go layers deeper than I would ordinarily. And then when I start typing, it starts coming even more fluid from my mind down to my fingertips. And so really I wanted to type and write about things that I don't feel like are getting enough attention. And I think as somebody who's 28 years old, a millennial, there's a lot of topics that are a little taboo to speak about. And I think especially amongst older people like my parents, they just never had some of these conversations. They weren't brought to the forefront. And now I think we're doing a better job of recognizing some of the things that are valuable to speak about. And I know you and I said we could talk about some of those topics, but I'm not sure if there's anything that.
Yeah, man, I definitely want to hear like what are some of the topics. I also just have a question about the process. So did you do this to become a better writer or to formulate thoughts better? Why did you take this challenge on?
I originally did it to become a better writer.
Okay.
And not only lean on my ability to one-on-one verbally speak to someone. Because as a former and current salesperson in some way, we lean on this ability to just speak with people, and that's our gift. But that's not scalable. Like, how many hour conversations can you have in a day? Max 24. Your reach is limited. And so I knew that that could be a bottleneck for me in my life, and I didn't want that. So I said, if I can get, but why do I only communicate this way? It's because I'm not as good in these other areas. And I can either choose to put some attention towards it and improve that skill, or I can use it as a crutch for the rest of my life and not open up what is available to me if I am willing to put time and energy into it.
Absolutely. It's a really good point. And I think, in the coaching space, I've noticed that as well for myself. It's actually pretty easy and natural for me to be able to help one person because I have so much context. I can drop a reference that I know is really gonna resonate with them, or bring in some example from their past coaching call or something like that, and everything is very personalized. But when you start to abstract, okay, what are the concepts here that are the foundational concepts that I could teach more like a curriculum, more like a mental model or something like that. And you start to create frameworks or really clarify concepts and philosophies. That's a lot harder, right? to like distill the lessons at their root and then be able to communicate them properly. in a way that's going to be received not just by one individual, but by everybody. I mean, this podcast and this show is an opportunity as well to expand reach beyond individual coaching calls. And also, I'm learning. It's really interesting to watch. Okay, where do I really have command of my thoughts? Like in which areas and which boxes am I like super succinct with? And where is there like, there's some lessons there, but they're still fuzzy and furry and messy. And like, I try to spit it out, but it doesn't come out the right way. And I'm sure, spitting it out the right way and writing it out the same way is probably fairly similar, but I don't know. Can you relate to this at all, or what's coming up for you?
100%. I think where I also thought about this is sometimes I'm like, man, I said that so well that one time. I wish I could say it that well every time.
Sure.
And if I write it down and I read it, I have it for the rest of my life if I want it. But a lot of times we don't record like that. Wow, that wing it time that we articulated something like super powerfully. And that's not something I wanted to give up, and I'm still working on. So some of the best pieces of content that I produce, at least I'm getting them down. At least that for me is landing.
Totally. I want to also ask one more question about the process. Now, you said the more you had to think about something, right, the more clarity came through. And also just, you mentioned how most people don't take the time to do this. And I think we're so distracted. There's always content to consume. There's way more content that I want to consume than I have time to consume it. And I think in general, a lot of times we're kind of settling for a very shallow existence. We kind of know what's going on, in the news. We kind of know how to run our business. We kind of understand leadership. We kind of understand sales. But there's not this like depth to the understanding of the topic to where we could really consider ourselves an expert. And I feel like this, if someone wants to be a thought leader, they need to spend a lot of time thinking. It's kind of my philosophy. Imagine that. But I don't know, do you agree with that? And what did you find in terms of how like the command that you got from this process to be able to articulate your thoughts more clearly because you actually forced yourself to do it?
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. And I heard it on a podcast recently, and Naval Ravikant said it, is if you are competent in something and truly understand it, you can distill it down very simply for other people to understand in several different ways. And until you're at that place, you don't really understand it. Because if you can't get someone else to understand it, because you can't articulate it simply enough, then you don't have just a core understanding of what you're speaking about, in my opinion. Because you should be able to say, Biggs, tell me about coaching. 5 different ways simply for me to understand what you're talking about. And so every time I think about that, I'm like, man, this makes sense in my head, but that's my head. And I've read a lot about this. How would I have to say it? Or what stories would I have to use? Or what would I have to do for someone who's never even been introduced to this concept to have a basic understanding of what I'm talking about?
I love that. You need to be able to explain it in many different ways. I think that's really, really well said. And I can definitely see how, again, just using my own examples, there's some areas where I'm like, oh my gosh, I have true mastery of these topics. Like, quiz me, I'm ready, let's rock. And there's somewhere it's like, I can maybe, give you some sort of like, I think this is kind of what's happening, or I think this is how it works, but I'm still working through it. I think that's good for us to kind of have our expertises, but also then to have our, areas where we're growing in our competency. When I moved to Mexico, when I was living down there to start Better Than Rich, all I would do all day was watch psychology lectures. And it was just like, I was just watching like, really hardcore nerdy, like, Psych 405 lectures and educating myself, but just watching, 100 hours of psychology lectures I felt like even though I don't have the diploma on the wall, I felt like I got that education at a deep enough level to where I can now just actually understand psychology way better. And so it's just actually investing that time and actually practicing it rather than, watching sports or flipping on something else or whatever, getting distracted. So talk to me then a little bit about what conversations, and topics you were writing about. And, it's if you're writing for 365 days, Mike, you probably have something to say. So what were some of the important things that came up for you? Some of the most interesting topics that you wrote about.
Mm-hmm. I also don't want to prevent people from starting because I
Yeah.
wanted to write and I was like, man, there's a lot of topics I want to write about. So I just started this tab on my phone where I was like, topics I want to write about. And eventually that list got whatever it got before I even started writing about any of it. And I'd have to look, but I think the first thing on there, I don't even know if I've written about.
Yeah.
Like sometimes I don't go with what I write about on the list of topics. Um, but topics that I don't feel like are given enough attention. And Biggs and I, we were speaking about this prior to hopping on here, but one topic I really find resonates with people is the birds and the bees talk. And have you had did you have that talk with your parents? And sometimes when I have this conversation with people, I'd say most of the time the answer is no.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, well, why do you think you didn't have it? Problem. My parents didn't know how to deliver it properly. It's not really the relationship I have with them. Well, what did that lead to in not having had this conversation? If you had the conversation, how do you think your relationship with your parents would be different?
Mm.
What is the level of communication that you guys have about really challenging topics? And when I ask women about this at times, it there's a lot more doors that open. They'll talk
Mm.
about how, man, I had a pregnancy scare or I had to have an abortion and I
Mm.
didn't feel like I could come to my parents because there was never an open door of communication around intimacy. And
Mm.
I'm like, wow, you told me, but you haven't told them. And that's fine. That's not wrong. But the ripple effect of not having had some of these important conversations and why we haven't had them, like, I think these are things that people want to talk about and how it's impacted them.
Mm. That's an interesting one. Uh, Difficult conversations around intimacy, conversations around taboo subjects, whether it's sex or drugs or whatever. It's a very interesting thing. I was talking with somebody just today, and they said, yeah, I got a tattoo 10 years ago, and I just know, like, I can't tell my mom. And it's like, she's been hiding her tattoo for 10 years. And it's like, I mean, that's okay, right? Like I said, that's her situation, working through it. But it's like that definitely points to something that I think, whether I don't know, do you think that's generational? Do you think that is just a certain style of parenting? Because I think that millennials were raised in a particular way, Gen Z is being raised in a particular way. What is this really pointing to, in your opinion?
I do think that I've studied generational theory, and
Mm-hmm.
the way generational theory goes is that there's one generation that is just way different from the rest of them in their century. So there's four per century.
Right.
Millennials were the most different of all of them. And that's because we've really been introduced to tech, and
Mm-hmm.
that's changed everything for us. Uh, what they value, like baby boomers watch their parents live or die more. So what did they value? They valued surviving. Gen X watched their parents have just enough to survive. So what did they want? They wanted achievement. Now millennials, and I'm oversimplifying here, but
Okay.
millennials watch their parents achieve and not achieve happiness, even though they have the material things. So what's important to a millennial is overall well-being,
Mm-hmm.
happiness, experience, solving the world's biggest problems. Like those are the things that you'll often hear. And so when the thing that's most important to you is not the thing that's most important to your parents, there's going to be a disconnect because they basically showed you how you should see the world, at least in their eyes. They taught you how to live. And so wherever you're at right now, they deserve some level of credit, and they're not fully accountable for wherever you're at. Like, it's a mix of both.
Hmm.
And so I think both of those things have to be weighed each time. And that's a big, big, big topic that I write about, is that so much of it is how we grew up, and so much of it is your personal agency to desire to improve. And you can't just blame how you grew up in circumstances. And it's not all you. You're not this superhero of your own story where, like, you've created everything. Like, you had some good breaks.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you've had some things occur. There's no strength that doesn't have a counter weakness. Whatever you prioritize, you can give me anything, Biggs, and I can give you something that you're sub-optimizing for by having that as a priority.
Totally. Well, I like this mindset because so many people, especially people in my space trying to sell you stuff, they say you can have it all the time, and like, it sounds nice on paper, but we live in a world of trade-offs. So sorry to be like burst everyone's bubbles here listening, but like, I'm not the guy who's gonna like rah you up and tell you, hey, you can have it all the time. I think you can have most of the things some of the time, or some of the things most of the time, or all the things every once in a while, but not all. Like, there's different ways that this is going to transpire for you in your life, but there's trade-offs, right? In life, and we need to embrace it. So it's really interesting what you're saying there. I think what I hear you saying is there's this paradox, and one of my philosophies at Better Than Rich is like, a lot of times the deepest truths hold paradox at their center, and the paradox is that there's some ways that you've been dealt a bad hand. There's been some ways that you've been dealt a good hand. And it's like, yes, we're screwed up in some ways. And also we're perfectly positioned to make the impact we're here to make in the world. And so it's like, a lot of times I say your parents or society or whatever, your upbringing has screwed you up in exactly the right way so that you can go and make the impact you're here to make. And so if you're sitting here listening to this and you're like, I have some wounds, I have some trauma, I have some, victim mentality, I have some situations or some things that happened to me that were, suboptimal. First off, A, join the club, that's everybody. But also B, a lot of times your deepest wound ends up being your greatest gift because you've gone through something that you can then help others go through. So, yeah, man, this is intriguing. What's coming up for you?
I just look because I write a lot of things down of things that I want to write about, and some of them aren't going to make sense to everybody. But I had a conversation the other day where I'm not heavily involved in politics, but the person I was communicating with, they were somebody I had no relationship with, and I asked them, "Hey, what's been the highlight of your week?" And they shared, it's been an exhausting week. Honestly, I've been really emotionally invested in the election. I haven't personally, which some people might mark as privilege, whatever. And so they said, I'm like, oh, who are you going for? I'm like, yeah, I don't follow politics super closely. I'm really trying not to engage in this topic. And they're like, well, you have an opinion. And I said my opinion. And they were just like, how could you think that? And they were heavy on one side. And what I said to him is, hey, like, can you share with me any valid reasons why someone would be on the other side? Not saying that they have to, but what are a couple reasons why someone would be on their other side? Because there are smart people on both sides. We have to agree on that. But immediately couldn't they said uneducated, ignorant. And I said, hey, I wanted valid reasons, and you don't have to answer the question, but we're not getting anywhere if you are telling me these things and you can't even try to understand why someone would be on one side versus the other if you're just on your side. Like that's not safe either.
Totally. Yeah, it's interesting. One of the things that has actually shown up, because we actually covered the election a little bit in previous episodes, but is just the idea that you should be able to articulate other people's points of view. And it's like, when I think about somebody who wrote for 365 straight days, it's, when we write, we're creating arguments, we're making points. We come up with a central idea, a thesis, and then we provide evidence to support the thesis, right?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we're using analogies, we're using, other, similes or metaphors, etc., to as vehicles and tools to help us in making that central point. But that's really what it is. It's making a point and then backing it up and providing the reasons why. And it's funny what you said. It's like, we actually shouldn't be, we should always give people the benefit of the doubt. And I always believe that there's signal in every noise. And so even if you think most of what somebody is saying is untrue, there's some kernel of truth there. There's something to learn in what they're sharing that we need to be looking for. We need to be looking for the truth, not what's not true, and see what we can learn. And so it's like, I actually want to know what the opposing points of view are, even if it's just so I can strengthen my own arguments against that point of view. So, these are just interesting conversations that I can't wait to read about when you release all of these documents to the public. Are you going to be releasing them, by the way? Do we get to read what you've written?
Yeah, so this is what I have right now. The name that I have for this blog that I'm going to come out with is Failures, Fuck-Ups, and Findings. And
Nice.
Mostly going to be all of my own mistakes and what I've found from making these mistakes. And I promise there's a lot of them. So that's going to be a big mission for 2021. I want to go back to one thing you just shared.
Sure.
Is most people don't engage in conversation other than to prove that they're right, which is really sad. Because I think if you dropped, and I haven't met any aliens, but for the point of this story, if you dropped aliens down and they saw two people arguing, they would say, the objective to understand each other's point of view better. It doesn't look like either one of these two are trying to understand each other's point of view better in the slightest. And to me, if you can bring me 1% closer to understanding your side, that's progress. And you feel it. I promise you that. Because it's momentum. And so in conversations, I was reading this book. I believe it's called Impossible Conversations, because I read about this topic a lot. They shared that in entering most debates, you're prioritizing one of two things: the relationship or being right. And you kind of have to decide what you want beforehand. And sometimes I'm reluctant to even enter some of these conversations because I know that this person is not going to change their mind, and it's just going to create more friction between us. So why engage in this instant? And don't get me wrong, you need some of that friction, right? And it's educational for people, and sometimes they do walk away. But for me, if I can make 1% of progress in understanding their viewpoint and they can make 1% mine, that's the game, is moving closer. We don't have to walk away here or we both understand each other completely. That's never going to happen, most likely. But even if we just go from I'm trying to get it in the picture here, from here to here, that's monumental, because most people are just going from here to staying here or here.
Right.
And ridiculing the other person for how they have those beliefs.
Totally. We have to ask ourselves, what is the evolutionary function of language? Right. So if you're an you use the alien example, if you're an evolutionary psychologist, or you're an evolutionary biologist, even, everything has been conserved, right, through those traits that are most adaptive are gonna propagate into the future. So obviously language is a psychotechnology, right, that's allowed us to propagate our species into the future and ultimately rule the planet, right? And so what's the point of language? It's to communicate something that might be useful to you, right? Even if it's just, how was your day? Oh man, don't even get me started. I was driving down the road and I hit a pothole, and it's oh, where was the pothole? It was on, Main Street. It's like, okay, like I got to watch out for potholes on Main Street now. Like I just got information that's useful to me. And that's the whole reason we communicate. So we want to understand, we're trying to actually gain information so we can better understand, have a more sophisticated and accurate model of the world. When our model of the world in our brains matches the reality of what the world is, then we experience less pain and we experience more pleasure. So this is what we're going for when we're communicating people. So it's not to try to win an argument. Now, I do think sometimes people get defensive because they're so attached to their beliefs, and it's like at the foundation of their identity, right? Such that when I'm attacking your beliefs, Mike, you interpret it as I'm attacking you. What do you think of that?
I think a question I like to ask in that situation, if I'm on the other side and I feel someone getting defensive, is, if you don't mind me asking, why does that bother you so much?
Mm-hmm.
And just try and have an understanding of like why I'm seeing what I'm seeing. And I'm lucky enough to have lived with roommates, and when you live with people, you're gonna have conflict because you don't have the same model of the world. And one thing we would say is sometimes this feels like you versus me, not us versus the problem. And we want to create the feeling of being on the same team. And sometimes we don't create that in arguments. We definitely like pull out our javelin and we're ready to joust,
Right.
And we're ready. I know I've been there. I'm like, I will verbally wrestle you until you are absolutely fatigued and I win. I've been there.
Mm-hmm.
And I go there often still. But I think for me, I just ask myself, this person cares about me. Whatever they're sharing because they care about me and they care about my self-improvement. And when that's the case, it's easier for me to receive. I just have to continue to remind myself that.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Well, this has been fun. We've covered a lot of ground together. I'm going to give you one last chance if there's anything else you want to drop, any sort of knowledge, any sort of wisdom, where people can find you. But yeah, man, any closing thoughts on today?
I think being open-minded is the thing I'd like people to walk away from this with. And if you're not open to engaging in conversation, it's unlikely that progress is going to be made. There's not been many downloads that I've ever had in my life from someone yelling at me. There hasn't been many downloads in my life that I've received from someone else when they were verbally attacking me. And I think sometimes we throw knives at people, which are actually useful utensils, but we expect people to catch the knife and then cut the object. And that's just unlikely. And so often, it's how we deliver the information to them that hopefully then can land for them to act on it. But that's where we can take accountability, at least, is in the delivery. Because sometimes that information is not going to land for them right now, and that's okay. We've all had that happen, where sometimes a year later, what Big said to me that I didn't want to receive right then, or I couldn't receive, or I didn't have the other things occur in my life happen yet for me to be able to receive that, they land now. But because you took the time to deliver it in a way that I could receive it, I got the lesson. But most people can't catch the lesson if you're not delivering it in a fashion that's receivable. So at least consider when you're sharing with other people is like, am I saying this in a way that they can receive this?
Love that, man. This has been fun. Thank you so much. Can't wait to learn more about failures, fuck-ups, and findings. We will wait with bated breath for the release. And yeah, man, thank you so much for being on the show. You're a dear friend, and let's catch up sometime, man. I want to see your face in person and hang out. Maybe I can show you a little piece of the Ozarks down here in Arkansas sometime. So we'll catch up soon. Thanks so much, Mike. Appreciate it. Thanks everyone for listening, and remember to leave today better than you found it. Bye, everyone.